Princess Silara walked through the long metallic corridors of the Zenari battleship Valthera. The cold silver walls reflected the soft blue glow of energy lines running along the floor. The air smelled of metal and electricity, the usual scent of a warship. Outside, beyond the thick glass panels, stars stretched across the endless darkness of space. Her long royal cloak flowed behind her as she moved with steady steps. 2 guards followed closely, their sharp armor clinking softly. But Silara hardly noticed them. Her mind was focused on one thing, the new prisoner. She had seen many humans before. The war between the Zenari Empire and the humans of Earth had been raging for years now. The Zenari had the advantage of superior technology, but humans were different. They never gave up. They fought with a fire that no other species had. Some Zenari respected them for it. Others feared them. Zilara. She wasn't sure how she felt. As she approached the holding cells, she straightened her posture. She had to be strong. As a princess, she had to show no weakness, no hesitation. The moment she stepped inside, the guards stood at attention. A Zenari officer saluted her. "Your Highness," he said, "the human prisoner is inside. He was captured during the Battle of Velos Prime." He refused to speak. Silara nodded and stepped toward the thick energy barrier that separated her from the prisoner. The force field hummed softly, glowing a pale green. At first, she could only see a shadow. Then, as she got closer, the prisoner's face became clear. Her heart stopped. The man sitting inside the cell was covered in dirt and bruises. His clothes were torn, and his hands were chained together. His short, dark hair was messy, and there was a deep cut on his cheek. But even through the bruises, even through the years, Silara knew that face. Elias Carter. She felt the world around her blur. The humming of the force field became distant. The voices of the guards faded. Elias. It couldn't be. But it was. Memories hit her like a crashing wave. Years ago, before she was called back to the Zenari homeworld, she had lived on a quiet colony world. It was a secret. No one was supposed to know that a Zenari princess was there. And it was there, on that distant planet, that she had met a human boy. Elias. They had spent years together, running through forests, climbing hills, staring at the stars. They had laughed, fought, and dreamed. Back then, there was no war. There was no empire, no politics, no battleships or prisons. Just 2 children exploring the world. Then, one day, she had been taken away. She never got to say goodbye. She never even knew what happened to him. And now, after all these years, he was here, a prisoner, a soldier of the enemy. Silara's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to speak, to say his name, but her voice refused to come out. Elias, on the other hand, showed no reaction. His deep brown eyes stared at her, unreadable, cold. Did he not recognize her? Did he not remember? Or did he simply not care anymore? She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. The guards were watching. She had to act normal. Taking a deep breath, she turned to the officer. "Leave us." The officer hesitated. "Your Highness, this human is dangerous." I said leave us." The officer and guards exchanged glances but obeyed. One by one, they stepped out of the room, leaving her alone with Elias. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Silara took a step closer. "Elias," she whispered. His expression didn't change. He simply stared, his eyes filled with quiet defiance. "So," he said, his voice rough but steady, "you know my name." Silara felt a pang in her chest. Did he really not remember her? She pressed a hand against the force field. "Elias," she said again, softer this time. "It's me. It's Silara." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Confusion. A spark of recognition. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. "I don't know who you are," he said coldly. Silara's fingers curled into a fist. He was lying. She knew he was lying. But why? She took a shaky breath. "You do know me," she said. "We grew up together. On the colony world of Vanafor. Do you remember? The fields of silver grass, the river where we used to race, the cave with the glowing stones." For a brief second, his eyes softened. She saw the walls around him crack, just a little. Then, just as quickly, his expression hardened again. "That was a long time ago," he said. "Everything's different now." Silera felt her throat tighten. Yes, everything was different now. She wanted to say more, to ask what had happened to him, to tell him how much she had missed him. But before she could, the doors hissed open. The officer stepped inside. "Your Highness, your father requests your presence immediately." Silera hesitated. She looked back at Elias, her mind racing. Then she nodded slowly. "I'll return," she said, meeting his eyes. "We need to talk." Elias didn't reply. He just watched as she turned and walked away. But as the doors closed behind her, Silera couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Princess Silera walked through the halls of the Zineri battleship Valthera, but her mind was somewhere else. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she could still see Elias's face in her thoughts. The same boy she had once known, but changed. He had looked at her like she was a stranger, cold, distant, as if their past meant nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Years ago, before the war, before she had been called back to the royal palace, Silera had lived on a quiet colony world, Vanafor. It was a beautiful place, filled with silver grass that shimmered under the twin suns, and rivers that glowed softly at night. Back then, no one knew she was a princess. Her identity was kept a secret for her safety. And that was where she had met Elias. He had been just a boy then, a few years older than her, wild and full of energy. He wasn't afraid of anything. He climbed the tallest trees, ran the fastest in races, and always had a daring smile on his face. She remembered how he had once saved her from falling into the rushing river, how they had spent hours watching the stars, dreaming of adventure, how he had promised that, no matter what, he would always look after her. And then, one day, she had been taken away. Her father, the Emperor, had sent a ship to bring her home. There had been no warning, no chance to say goodbye. She had cried, begging to stay, but duty was more important than friendship. She never saw Elias again, until now. Silera reached the entrance to the throne room, where her father, Emperor Zareth, was waiting. Taking a deep breath, she pushed aside her emotions and stepped inside. The throne room was vast, with high ceilings and glowing banners displaying the royal emblem of the Zineri Empire. The Emperor sat on his throne, his dark robes flowing like shadows. His golden eyes studied her as she approached. "You met the human prisoner," he said without emotion. "Yes, father." Silera kept her voice steady. "I wanted to assess his value." The Emperor narrowed his eyes. "He is a soldier, a dangerous one. We will not waste time with negotiations. He will be executed." Silera felt a sharp pain in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Father, the human could have information. If we question him, he might reveal." "There is nothing to learn," the Emperor interrupted. "His capture was accidental. He was found alone, trying to escape after a failed human mission. He is of no use to us. Alone." Silera's fingers curled into fists. Why had Elias been alone? Had his people abandoned him? Had he been left behind? She needed to know the truth. Bowing her head, she spoke carefully. "May I request time to interrogate him? If he has nothing to offer, then his fate will be decided as you wish." The Emperor studied her for a long moment. "You seem interested in this human." Silera forced a neutral expression. "I am only thinking of the Empire, father." Silence. Then, at last, the Emperor nodded. "Very well. You have until tomorrow." Silera bowed once more and left the room. But inside, her mind was racing. Tomorrow. That was all the time she had. She had to speak to Elias. She had to make him remember. Back in the cell, Elias sat in his cold cell, staring at the metal floor. His hands were still bound in chains, but that wasn't what troubled him. His thoughts were a storm. Silara. The moment he had seen her, something had cracked inside him. He had recognized her instantly. The girl from his childhood. The friend he had lost. But he couldn't let her know that. Not yet. Elias had been captured during a secret mission. His team had been sent to destroy a Zenari superweapon, but the mission had gone wrong. He had been separated from his squad, forced to flee. He had almost escaped, but luck had run out. And now he was a prisoner. A part of him had expected interrogation, maybe even torture, but he had not expected her. The Silara he had known was kind, full of curiosity and laughter. But the woman who stood before him now was different, colder, distant, a true princess of the Zenari Empire. She had called his name. She had looked at him with shock, with emotion. But what did she truly feel? Was she still his friend, or was she now his enemy? He couldn't take the risk. He couldn't trust her. The door to his cell suddenly slid open, and he looked up. Silara stepped inside. The guards did not follow her. The door shut behind her, leaving them alone. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then, she took a slow breath and spoke. "You lied to me." Elias didn't react. "Did I?" Her eyes narrowed. "You remember me." He stayed silent. Silara took a step closer, her voice softer. "Why are you pretending?" Elias clenched his jaw. He wanted to say something. Anything. But he couldn't. If she found out why he was really here, she might turn against him. He couldn't afford to trust her. Not yet. Silara watched him carefully. Then, finally, she whispered, "I know you, Elias. You don't give up. You never did. And I won't give up on you." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone once more. Elias closed his eyes, his heart heavy. This wasn't just a battle of war anymore. This was a battle of trust. And he wasn't sure who would win. Elias sat in the cold prison cell, staring at the metallic walls. The dim green glow of the force field cast shadows on the floor, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept replaying his conversation with Silara. She knew. She knew he had lied about not remembering her, and yet she had not exposed him. Why? He clenched his fists. This was dangerous. Silara was no longer the carefree girl he had once known. She was a princess now. Royalty in an empire that saw humans as nothing more than obstacles in their path. If she decided to betray him, he would not survive. But if she had truly wanted to hurt him, why had she looked at him like that? Like she still cared. Elias let out a slow breath. He couldn't afford to be weak. His mission had already failed, but there was still one thing he could do. Escape. The moment the thought entered his mind, the door to his cell slid open. Silara stepped inside. This time, she wore no royal cloak. Her silver-blue uniform hugged her frame, and her deep violet eyes locked onto his with determination. The door sealed behind her, leaving them alone. She took a step forward. "No more lies, Elias." Elias remained silent. Silara crossed her arms. "You remember me. I know you do. So why are you pretending?" He looked away. "What difference does it make?" She sighed, her voice quieter now. "It makes a difference to me." Elias turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "You're a princess of the Zenari Empire. Silara, I'm a human prisoner. That's the only thing that matters now." For a moment, she looked hurt, but she quickly masked it. "That's not true. You know it's not. She hesitated, then said, "I need to understand." Elias gave a short, bitter laugh. "Understand what?" "That the little girl you once knew grew up to be your enemy." He shook his head. "That's the truth, Silara. We're not the same people anymore." She frowned. "Then tell me, what happened to you, Elias? Why are you here?" He hesitated. His mission was classified. If she found out, it could put her in danger. But at the same time, he couldn't lie to her again. Finally, he sighed. "I was on a mission." Silara's eyes sharpened. What kind of mission? Elias hesitated again, but then he decided, if he was going to tell her anything, he might as well tell the truth. "My team was sent to destroy a Zinari weapon," he admitted. "A super weapon." Silara's breath caught. "That's impossible. There is no—" She stopped, realization dawning in her eyes. The Zinari military had been working on something in secret. She had overheard whispers about it, but had never been given full details. If Elias knew about it, then humans were closer to the truth than the Zinari leaders thought. "What do you know about it?" she asked carefully. Elias studied her face. She looked sincere, but could he trust her? Finally, he decided to take a risk. "I know that if humanity doesn't stop it, millions of lives will be lost." Silara's heart pounded. She had always followed orders, always done what was expected of her. But she had never been told that her people were working on something so dangerous. Could it be true? She shook her head. "Even if what you're saying is right, what do you expect me to do about it?" Elias met her gaze. "You're the princess. You have access to information. If you can confirm it, then you know what's at stake." Silara opened her mouth to argue, but the words didn't come. Deep down, she knew Elias wasn't lying. She had seen the desperation in his eyes. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting to save his people. And if what he said was true, then her own people were hiding something terrible. The weight of her duty pressed against her shoulders. She took a step back, her mind racing. "I need time to think." Elias nodded, but his expression was serious. "We don't have much time, Silara." She turned and walked to the door. Before leaving, she looked back at him one last time. "I'll find out the truth." Then she was gone, leaving Elias alone with his thoughts. This was his only chance. Now, he could only hope that the girl he once knew still had a heart strong enough to do what was right. Silara walked through the dimly lit corridors of the Zinari battleship, her mind spinning with doubt and confusion. The weight of Elias's words pressed heavily on her heart. A super weapon, a threat to millions. If he was telling the truth, then everything she believed in, the empire, her duty, her people, was built on a lie. She needed proof. Stopping outside a heavily guarded door, she took a deep breath. This was the High Command's data chamber, where classified information was stored. Only high-ranking officials were allowed inside. As a princess, she had clearance, but accessing secret files without permission could be considered treason. But she had to know. Summoning her courage, she stepped forward. The two guards at the entrance straightened and saluted. "Princess Silara," one of them said. "Do you require access?" She nodded, keeping her expression calm. "I need to verify information for the Emperor. This is a priority matter." The guards exchanged a glance before one of them pressed a panel on the wall. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Silara stepped inside. The chamber was filled with towering digital archives, glowing softly in the darkness. She moved quickly, her fingers flying over the control panel as she searched for any mention of a super weapon. Her heart pounded as classified files appeared on the screen. Project Silent Storm. She opened it. Lines of text and holographic images filled the screen. Her breath caught in her throat. It was worse than she had imagined. The Zinari Empire had been developing a devastating weapon capable of erasing entire planetary populations in minutes, a biological disruptor, one that targeted only humans. Silara's fingers trembled. This was no ordinary war strategy. This was genocide. Elias had been right. A wave of guilt crashed over her. How could she have been so blind? How could she have believed her people were only defending themselves? Her father knew. The entire High Command knew. And yet, they had kept this a secret, even from her. Scilara clenched her jaw. She had a choice to make. She could remain silent, obey her father, and let the weapon be used. Or she could act. She knew what she had to do. Taking a deep breath, she downloaded the files onto a small data chip. Her time was running out. If anyone discovered her, she would be in danger. Slipping the chip into her belt, she turned to leave. The door suddenly opened. Commander Varric stood there, his golden eyes narrowing as he saw her. He was one of the Emperor's most loyal officers, and he did not trust her. "Princess," he said slowly, stepping inside. "What are you doing here?" Scilara kept her face neutral, researching security protocols. Varric's eyes flicked to the screen behind her, where the files were still open. "Project Silent Storm." His voice was sharp. "That is restricted information." Stilara's heart pounded, but she refused to show fear. "I have the right to access it." Varric studied her for a long moment. Then his expression darkened. "You've been speaking to the human prisoner." Scilara stiffened. Varric took a step closer. "He filled your head with lies, didn't he?" His voice was low, dangerous. The Emperor knew this might happen. That's why he ordered the human's execution. Sciara's blood ran cold. "What?" Varric smirked. "The execution is set for sunrise." "No." A spark of panic ignited in Sciara's chest. She had thought she had more time. She had thought she could find a way to stop this. She had to act now. Forcing herself to stay calm, she looked at Varric with a cold expression. "The prisoner is mine to interrogate. The execution will not happen until I say so." Varric's eyes narrowed. "The Emperor has given the order." Scilara lifted her chin. "And I will speak to my father personally, unless you plan to question the authority of the royal family." Varric hesitated. He could not openly defy the Emperor's daughter. Not yet. After a long pause, he finally bowed his head slightly. "Very well, Princess." Scilara turned and walked past him, her hands clenched into fists. She had bought herself a little time, but not much. She had to get Elias out of there before sunrise. She hurried down the halls, her mind racing. She could not do this alone. She needed help. And there was only one person she could trust. Back in the prison cell, Elias sat on the cold floor, his thoughts heavy. He had lost hope of escaping. But deep down, he still believed Scilara wouldn't let him die. The door to his cell suddenly slid open. He looked up. Scilara stood there, her eyes filled with urgency. "You were right," she whispered. "The weapon is real. My people are planning to use it." Elias's heart pounded, and Scilara took a deep breath. "And I'm getting you out of here." Elias stared at her. "Why?" Her voice was quiet but firm. "Because it's the right thing to do." For the first time, Elias saw something familiar in her eyes. The same girl he had once known. And he knew he could trust her. She stepped forward and pressed a code into the control panel. The chains around his wrists unlocked, and he rubbed his sore wrists. "Can you walk?" she asked. Elias nodded. "Where are we going?" Scilara glanced over her shoulder. "I have a plan. But we need to move now." Elias stood up, determination burning in his chest. This was their only chance. Together, they stepped into the shadows, ready to defy an empire. Elias followed Scilara through the dimly lit corridors of the Zenari battleship. His body ached from days of captivity, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He had no time for weakness now. They had to escape before sunrise, before his execution. Scilara moved quickly, her steps silent against the cold metal floor. She had changed out of her royal uniform, and now wore a dark cloak to blend into the shadows. Elias had no such disguise, but he stayed close behind her, trusting her plan. "Where are we going?" he whispered. "To the docking bay," Scilara murmured back. "I have a small transport ship hidden there. If we reach it, we can get off this ship undetected." Elias frowned. "And what about the security systems?" The guards. Silara didn't answer immediately. She stopped at a control panel, her fingers flying over the glowing buttons. I disabled some security checkpoints before coming to your cell, but there are still guards patrolling the halls. We'll have to move carefully. The door in front of them slid open with a soft hiss. Silara peeked outside, then nodded. Clear. Let's go. Elias followed her into another corridor. The battleship was massive, with sleek metal walls and bright control panels lining the passageways. The entire structure hummed with energy, a reminder that they were still deep inside enemy territory. Every step they took was a risk. Suddenly, Silara stopped and pulled Elias into a dark alcove. Footsteps. 2 Zenari guards walked past, their weapons resting in their hands. They were speaking in low voices, unaware of the 2 figures hiding in the shadows. Elias held his breath. If they were caught now, there would be no second chances. The guards walked past without noticing them. Silara waited a moment before exhaling softly. Come on. They moved quickly, reaching a large metal door at the end of the hallway. Silara pressed a sequence of buttons on a small panel, and the door unlocked with a quiet beep. Beyond it was a small storage bay, filled with crates of supplies. A narrow ventilation shaft was built into the wall. Silara pointed at it. This leads directly to the docking bay, she whispered. It's tight, but it's our best way in. Elias nodded. He didn't like tight spaces, but he had no choice. Silara climbed in first, moving carefully through the narrow passage. Elias followed, pulling himself forward with his arms. The metal walls of the vent were cold, and every movement made a soft echo. After several tense minutes, they reached the end of the shaft. Silara carefully pushed open the vent cover and peeked out. The docking bay lay below them. It was a massive open space, filled with sleek Zenari ships. A few mechanics worked near the larger vessels, but their attention was focused elsewhere. Silara pointed toward a small transport ship in the corner. That's ours. Elias studied the path between them and the ship. The mechanics weren't a problem, but a group of guards stood near the main entrance. If they were spotted, alarms would sound immediately. Silara took a deep breath. We have to move fast. Stay close to the shadows and don't stop. Elias nodded. One by one, they dropped down from the vent, landing softly on the floor. They crouched behind a stack of crates, listening for any signs of alarm. Nothing. Silara motioned for Elias to follow her. They moved quickly, staying hidden behind equipment and supply boxes. Every step brought them closer to the transport ship. Then, a loud beep echoed through the docking bay. Silara froze. One of the guards had activated a communication device. His voice echoed through the space. Commander Varric has ordered a security sweep of the docking bay. All personnel remain alert for any suspicious activity. Elias's jaw tightened. They were running out of time. Silara grabbed his wrist. We have to go. Now. They sprinted the last distance to the transport ship. Silara pressed a code into the control panel, and the hatch slid open. Alarms blared. The guards had spotted them. Go, Silara shouted. Elias leaped inside as energy blasts struck the metal walls around them. Silara followed, slamming the hatch shut. She ran to the pilot's seat, her fingers flying over the controls. The ship roared to life. Hang on, she yelled. The transport lifted off the ground, spinning sharply as more energy blasts fired toward them. Silara's hands gripped the controls tightly, dodging the attacks with expert precision. Elias strapped himself into a seat. Can you get us out of here? Silara gritted her teeth. We'll find out. The ship shot forward, racing toward the docking bay doors. More alarms blared, warning of their escape. Then, the doors began to close. They're trying to trap us in, Elias shouted. Silara pushed the engines to maximum power. Not if I can help it. The ship rocketed forward, slipping through the narrow opening just before the doors sealed shut behind them. They were free. The blackness of space stretched out before them, stars glittering like distant fireflies. But they weren't safe yet. Silera checked the sensors. They're sending fighters after us. Elias clenched his fists. Then let's hope you're as good a pilot as I remember. Silera smirked, her eyes burning with determination. Better. The transport ship twisted through the darkness, evading the pursuing Zenari fighters. They had escaped the battleship, but the real fight was just beginning. The stars blurred outside the cockpit window as Silera gripped the ship's controls, her hand steady despite the chaos. The Zenari fighters were closing in fast, their sleek black forms cutting through space like hunting beasts. Red warning lights flashed across the control panel, indicating multiple enemy ships locking onto them. Elias strapped himself into the co-pilot's seat, scanning the radar. We've got 3 fighters on our tail and more incoming. Do we have weapons? Silera shook her head. This is a transport ship, not a war vessel. We're fast, but we can't fight back. Elias frowned. Then how do we escape? Silara's eyes flicked across the navigation screen. A dense asteroid field lay ahead, its jagged rocks drifting like silent guardians in the void. It was dangerous. One wrong move, and they would be crushed. But it was also their only chance. She pointed at the screen. We go through there. Elias's eyes widened. That's suicide. Silera gave him a determined look. It's also the only way to lose them. The fighters behind them opened fire, red energy blasts streaking past the ship. One shot grazed their hull, sending sparks flying inside the cockpit. Elias cursed. All right. Asteroid field it is. Silera pushed the engines to full throttle, and the ship surged forward, diving into the asteroid field. The chase. Massive rocks tumbled through space, some the size of small moons, others no larger than a fighter ship. Silera twisted the controls, weaving through the deadly maze with expert precision. The Zenari fighters followed, but their speed became their weakness. One of the enemy ships miscalculated a turn and slammed into an asteroid, exploding in a bright flash. Elias whooped. One down. Silera didn't celebrate. She was too focused on the path ahead, dodging and spinning between the tumbling debris. Another fighter fired, and a blast hit their left engine. The ship shuddered violently. Engines damage. Elias shouted, checking the systems. We're losing power. Silara's mind raced. They wouldn't last much longer. If they didn't escape now, they never would. Then she saw it, a hidden passage between 2 massive asteroids. It was a narrow gap, barely big enough for their ship. She pointed. Hold on. Elias's eyes widened. You're not serious. But she was. The ship shot forward, heading straight for the gap. The remaining 2 fighters followed, but Silara's timing was perfect. She twisted the ship at just the right moment, squeezing through the tight space. One of the pursuing fighters tried to follow. Crash. The asteroid slammed shut like a giant's jaws, crushing the fighter into dust. Only one enemy remained. Elias grinned. That was incredible. Silera didn't respond. Her focus was still locked on the fight. The last Zenari fighter was more cautious now, staying back and waiting for an opening. Elias's hands flew over the controls. If we can't shoot them down, we need to outthink them. Silera nodded. Then an idea struck her. She activated the ship's external debris release, a safety feature that ejected unnecessary weight to prevent overheating. The ship dropped a series of broken metal panels and old fuel canisters into space. The Zenari fighter, not expecting the sudden debris, swerved too late. A sharp metal panel slammed into its wing, sending it spiraling out of control. The enemy pilot tried to stabilize, but his ship crashed into a large asteroid, exploding in a brilliant fireball. Silence filled the cockpit. They had won. Elias exhaled. I can't believe that worked. Silera finally allowed herself a small smile. Neither can I. A new destination. With the enemy ships gone, They finally had a moment to breathe. But they weren't safe yet. The Ceneri Empire would be searching for them. They needed a place to hide. Elias checked the star map. There's an abandoned space station nearby. If we land there, I can fix the engine. Silara nodded. Set the course. As Elias entered the coordinates, he glanced at Silara. You just risked everything to save me. You're a princess. If your people find out what you've done, you'll be branded a traitor. Silara's expression darkened. I know. Then why did you do it? She hesitated. Then she met his gaze. Because I realized something. The Ceneri Empire isn't just at war with humans. It's at war with the truth. And I won't be part of their lies anymore. Elias studied her for a moment. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the struggle between loyalty and doing what was right. He nodded. Then we fight together. Silara's lips curved into a determined smile. Yes, together. As the ship sailed toward the abandoned station, both of them knew their journey was far from over. But for the first time, they weren't running alone. They were ready to stand against the Empire. And this was only the beginning. The transport ship glided through space, its engine struggling but still holding. Elias kept a close eye on the navigation panel, while Silara piloted with careful precision. Ahead of them, the abandoned space station drifted silently in the void. It was an old, forgotten outpost, once used by traders and smugglers, now a relic of the past. The metal structure was covered in patches of rust, and its lights flickered weakly. But it was hidden, and that was all they needed. We're almost there, Silara said, guiding the ship toward the docking bay. I just hope the station's systems still work. Elias exhaled. If they don't, I'll figure something out. The docking bay doors responded slowly, grinding open as if reluctant to welcome visitors. Silara maneuvered the ship inside. And the moment they landed, the engine sputtered and died. We made it, Elias said with relief. Silara unbuckled her seatbelt. Let's check the station and see if we can make repairs. Inside the forgotten station, they stepped into the dimly lit corridors of the station, the air stale from years of neglect. Dust floated in the weak artificial gravity, and flickering emergency lights cast long shadows against the walls. Elias found a control panel and pressed a few buttons. Power levels are low, but life support is still active. We can stay here for now. Silara nodded. Good. Let's fix the ship before the Ceneri track us. Elias grabbed a toolkit from a storage locker and returned to the docking bay. The damage to the engine was worse than he thought. Burned out circuits, a leaking coolant line, and a cracked stabilizer. This won't be easy, he muttered. Silara crouched beside him. Tell me what to do. He glanced at her. You want to help. She smirked. I didn't come all this way just to watch. Together, they worked on the ship. Hours passed as they replaced damaged wires, patched up the hull, and realigned the thrusters. It was exhausting, but with each repair, hope grew stronger. Finally, Elias wiped his forehead. That should do it. The ship's good to fly again. Silara smiled. Then we're ready for the next step. A dangerous decision. Elias frowned. The next step. Silara's expression turned serious. Elias, we can't just run forever. The Ceneri Empire will never stop hunting us. He sighed. I know. She took a deep breath. Then let's stop running. Let's fight back. Elias blinked. Fight back? You mean start a rebellion? Silara nodded. Yes, there are others out there, humans, Ceneri, and many more, who don't agree with the Empire's rule. We can find them. We can unite them. Elias hesitated. Silara, this isn't just about survival anymore. If we do this, we're declaring war. She met his gaze, fire burning in her violet eyes. The Empire declared war on us first. It's time we answered. Elias saw the determination in her face. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about justice. It was about standing up for what was right. And he couldn't walk away from that. He grinned. "All right, princess. Let's start a revolution." Silara laughed. "Just Silara. No more titles." They clasped hands, sealing their alliance. The first message of hope. Elias returned to the control panel, rerouting power to the station's old communication system. "If we're going to start a rebellion, we need allies. We need to send a message." Silara nodded. "Make it count." Elias took a deep breath and activated the transmitter. Across the galaxy, anyone listening on the right frequency would hear his voice. "This is a message to all who refuse to live under the Empire's rule. My name is Elias Carter. I am a human, a former prisoner of the Zenari Empire. But I am no longer running. I am no longer afraid. And neither should you be. With me is Silara, a Zenari who has chosen truth over lies. Together, we stand against tyranny. If you hear this message and believe in freedom, find us. Join us. The rebellion begins today." He ended the transmission and turned to Silara. "Now we wait." Silara nodded. "They will come." Beyond the station, the stars burned bright, each one holding the promise of new allies, new battles, and a new future. Their fight had only just begun. The revolution was here.